I would like to invite on stage my colleague from British Council London, Tim Slingsby, Advisor in Public Engagement in Science for the British Council, and our panelists, Betty Tsakarestou, Professor at the Department of Communication, Media and Culture at Pantheon University, Χρυσή Karapanagiotis, Assistant Professor of Environmental Chemistry in the Department of Chemistry at University of Patras, Louise, again, please join us, and Anna Marie Vilamovska, Secretary for Science and Healthcare from the Administration of the President of the Republic of Bulgaria. And I would like Todor to stay on the panel as well.
Thank you, everybody. So as you heard, I'm Tim Slingsby. I'm the British Council's advisor for public engagement in science. And what we have now is an opportunity to discuss the wider aspects of the early results of the March survey, as well as addressing some of the results you've heard from the Aspire study as well. And I'm really looking forward to chairing this session and getting some pretty fascinating perspectives from the panel. When I ask questions like this, I tend to ask them of teachers. So it's going to be interesting to get the perspective of those in academia and policymakers rather than those of teachers, and see if there is a split in opinion or split in ideas. So I'm certain we've got plenty of time to provoke discussion points from you as well. So as the discussion continues, at certain points I will open up the discussion to points and questions from the audience, because I think it's very important to hear from you guys. As sort of a segue into this, it's interesting to note from both of the presentations so far this morning that policymakers continue to note that STEM industries are vital to economic growth, yet it seems that we tend to rely on education systems that discourage young people, and particularly girls, from aspiring to STEM careers. So I think that the work that we're doing in the March project and the work that Louise has done with the Aspires project is vital to highlighting the problems that we have with current education systems. We only need to look at yesterday and this morning's news about the landing of a satellite on a comet and the incredible interest that's got from within and without the science community to see that science requires imagination and innovation and creativity. But our education systems tend to be reductive in their outlook and rely on examining historical recollection of historical facts, I think. So I'm going to try and ask some questions that dig down into that as well. But without further ado, I think we've heard enough from me now. I'm going to ask each of the panelists to give a brief introduction of themselves and of their general perspective of science education from their own experience. And then I'll ask a few questions. Please note that, unfortunately, Louise has to dash back to the UK at midday, so she'll be leaving us a little early, but I'm sure we can get plenty of interesting points from her before then. So obviously we've heard from Louise and Todor, so perhaps you can give a brief introduction of yourselves again once we've heard from our first panelist here.
Hello, everybody. It's a great pleasure to join the conference and the panel. And thank you for this invitation as well. My name is Betty Tsakarestou. I'm assistant professor, not professor, at the Department of Communication, Media and Culture, and head of Advertising and Public Relations Lab at Pantheon University. In my capacity as Advertising and Public Relations Lab, which is actually a lab oriented to connect communication studies with the business sector and the social innovation. For years, we are working very deeply into introducing science and technology into our curricula. Also, I had the opportunity to work with educational television at the Ministry of Education since 2010, from 2010 to 2012, and we have collaborated in introducing science education in primary and secondary schools along with the British Council. So my, let's say, experience and, let's say, also policy making in those fields is that STEM, tech and technology actually are part of the same DNA of social or creative sciences. I think that one of the key problems is that even though that we have recognized absolutely the need to bridge all those sectors that actually we have inherited from the industrial area as distinct domains and to connect them, we still present this need for connection also as a challenge to connect different worlds now are in need to get connected. So somehow we keep this narrative of the distinct and weird worlds that have somehow to come into joint forces. And not, of course, in specialized and, let's say, think tank groups as in this area, but how we produce storytelling and narratives when we go to public, to schools, to universities, or to media or to social media. So one of the challenges I try to address is this issue, and at least my efforts, along with many colleagues from academia, from business sector, from tech sector, from startup sector, from designers, with the developers, geeks, whatever, we join forces and now we connect hubs around introducing innovative challenges and problem-solving, let's say, projects around which we try to engage and inspire and aspire students to to a co-creation mode. So for us, the keyword is co-creation and creativity and problem-solving and make things happen. So we try to find a starting point from where students and ourselves actually were passionate. We're introducing, let's say, this excellent aspect of starting with why. Simon Sinek is one of the TED Talk speakers that actually introduced this idea. Start with why, and then go to how, and then to what. So we reverse the order of the things, not what science do, but why we are in it, how we do it, and then actually what we do it. So this is my first take on the issue. Thank you very much.
Okay, good morning. I'm Chrysi Karapanagiotti. I'm assistant professor in the University of Patras in the chemistry department. What I do is I teach chemistry in the elementary school teachers to be, and I teach teaching in the chemistry students, so I can see both sides. I usually get questions from my students, especially from the elementary school teachers. Why do we need to learn chemistry? We are going to be teachers at the elementary school. And my chemistry students, they ask me, okay, we have the knowledge, why do we need to learn teaching? So I get both questions every year. My view related to science teaching in Greece, I can see that it's difficult to get away from the restrictions we get from the ministry related to the topics that we need to teach. I can see that it's difficult to, and there is a fear about the results that we have if we use a new way of teaching. And most of the teachers, they need the approval either from the parents or from their supervisors. They don't take initiatives. They wait for somebody else to talk to them and ask them to do something extra from what is expected from them. And also I can see that there is an overlook on the role that the teachers have on the change of the attitude of the students towards science. They feel that they have to teach knowledge, and they overlook this need to change the attitude of the students to love science. So I think this is a very important thing, especially at the young age of students. So that's the 2 points I wanted to make. Thank you for having me here.
Hello, everyone. My name is Anna Maria Vilamovska. I'm the Secretary for Science and Healthcare Policy of the President of Bulgaria. Thank you very much indeed for having me over too. What do? I do mostly policies, designing different initiatives on a very high level, such as framework agreements and budgeting, quite large portfolio. But I don't work on ground and I don't work with curricula. So my point of view is rather distinct from what my colleagues at the ministry, for example, have. And when we speak about STEM or science and technology, Tim, responding to your question, I think of it as a universal value. Because more and more, all of the analysis, even the two that we saw today and which were extremely informative, suggest that we need engagement. And we really need to move from communicating science and communicating facts to empowering critical thinking. And this empowerment, it relates very much to civil society, and that's why I fully subscribe to the point of view that, as a matter of fact, science education is a pivotal point in civic education today. It's also a very interesting phenomena that one witnesses when one has children, that sometimes data in school books have changed over a number of years. And when I was a child and when I was learning, no one mentioned to me that actually science evolves, and it was a big discovery. And it's simply, I'm simply saying it to emphasize the fact that we also need, in my opinion, to show better how science arrives at its conclusion. So the process of science education. I think this is where the key to empowerment actually lies. And I'm going to leave it at that for
now. Thank you. If we can hear just slightly more briefly from Louise and then Teodor about your immediate impressions of or awareness of STEM education.
Thank you. So, yes, I suppose picking up on the point I made earlier, I think one of the main challenges is how we move from this vision of what science is that currently is communicated to children in schools, which is actually nothing like what real science in the outside world is like. You know, all of you working in science know it's not just about learning facts and things and static knowledge. And I suppose the challenge in moving from what I called the pipeline model to a citizenship model, where we're telling young people the reason you're learning this in school is because it will help you in life, is actually there's a bit of a challenge for the science community in there, because science does get a lot of its prestige and status from this notion of being hard and brainy and tied to the pipeline. And so there's an inherent tension there of, can we really widen participation to science while keeping hold of a very narrow elitist model of science? And I don't think the two are necessarily compatible, so that's a challenge that I'm interested in.
If we look back, we will see that actually we moved from public understanding of science. This was concept, let's say, 20 or 30 years ago. Then it was raising awareness. Then we moved, or it's part of raising awareness, to science communication, or to how to communicate science to the lay public, to the general public, and specific targets group. And now I think there is a new mood for making science really part of the everyday life. We need to change the attitudes of all the population, not only of younger generation, but also of older generation towards science. And I think this is the crucial point that we have to deal with in next 10 years, let's say. And if you let me just share one personal experience with this. A colleague of mine told me, we play a special game when I travel with my kids in the car. And this game is they look for lucky numbers on the plates of the cars around. I said, what is this lucky numbers of the plates? And he told me, lucky number is when with some arithmetic you can, for example, sum the first two numbers, and this would be a lucky number if the sum of the third and the fourth number is the same, the sums are the same, or you do some different arithmetics and find that the results from the two first numbers are the same as the results of the last numbers. And I asked, do you really live this? Your kids really live this, to do this? He said, yes, they actually do this for hours when we travel outside the city. And I was really surprised. And short after that, looking for science-related mobile games in Apple Store, I found the same app actually, doing the same, but for the mobile. It was invented actually, as I found, it was not invented, sorry, it was made by one 14 years kid from India. And it has some thousands of, or hundreds of thousands of downloads from Apple Store. So science is everywhere around us, and we really can inspire our kids. And not only our kids, because my colleague is not a kid, but he's enough inspired like his kids. We have to inspire all the people for science in everyday life.
Thank you for those really interesting perspectives that have already answered all of the questions that I have lined up. But I think there's a general theme from the panelists developing, which is that there's a real determination to move away from science and STEM subjects as being on their own and elitist and only for those that are perceived as being capable of doing them. But in order for us to do that, I think there's also a general perception that we need to empower teachers and support teachers to better demonstrate how science works, which in turn ought to impart a love of science, an appreciation for science. So if we dig down into that a little bit, my first question is about the proper support or wider support for science teachers. And I wonder if you are aware in the systems with which you are most familiar of opportunities for teachers either to continue their professional development and or is there space within the work that teachers do to keep up to date with scientific developments, i.e. the idea that science and research evolves? And why don't we go in order for now? So from here to there.
Thanks. Well, so in England we have a national body called the National Science Learning Centre who coordinate continuing professional development, CPD, for teachers. So I'd say that's a good resource, and that's something I think that's going well. But of course, it's out of step sometimes with national policy discourse, and I don't know if this is the same with other countries, where there's a declining resource base for funding professional development. So we have some structures, but we have also a declining level of financial support for it, and less time for teachers to engage in it. So I think it's always the difficulty of how these things get made real. And I would say there's a lot of interest in the UK in how we can better have research-informed practitioners, so how teachers can be reflective and research-based in their teaching. But again, I wouldn't say we're anywhere near cracking that. Scotland has got a lot further than England, interestingly, in that. But there's, I think, still some real challenges because I don't think it's realistic in England for our teachers to be expected to go online and look up all this information and learn it and digest it and do their regular jobs anyway, which are very hard pressed. So I'd say we have challenges there that
So I will give you two parts in this question. First of all, I will try to address this issue related to the primary and secondary education, and then I will come to the university. The first part is related to my experience with educational television and coming into contact with the schools and the ICT education, as we call it. And let's say that on the policy level, there are much initiatives that try to initiate and to introduce STEM education across all levels of primary and secondary education. And there are a lot of ICT clusters among the teachers that take really wonderful initiatives that going extra curriculum. But it still pertains that actually these are really innovation clusters, and it's not the actual culture that is prevailing in Greece. So again, I think it is valid that policy making. So I think my approach would be that should open the opportunities and not try to dictate all possible ways and manners how schools and teachers and students and communities and maybe parents or neighborhoods could enable this type of projects and initiatives. So what I mean is that we need to trust the people, to give more trust and more room to experiment and to discover extra curriculum. So the curriculum perhaps should be perceived as a framework for people to be able to experiment and to develop their own, let's say, personalized curricula or school curriculum. That, I think, would give more room to experiment and to learn from different approaches. And that could also open up the opportunity to disseminate a feeling and an approach that this is a creative space for us. We develop, we grow, again, find our own way. So I think that moving from the policy making that actually recognizes the challenge, but nevertheless has an approach that it has to control it all the way, top down. I think this is actually a real challenge and maybe an obstacle for this type of approaches. Going to the next level, which is the university level, actually there we have more freedom to do this type of experiments. And at least in my capacity, in our department, in our labs now, about 3 labs, advertising and public relations, journalist lab and cultural lab, now we join forces and ask people from the society, from the industry, from the science, from the technology, from the arts, to work with us in projects. So this is how we overcome the strong resistance from our students, because they're coming from this educational system that they think in boxes. We are here for the communication, what it has to do with astronomy. Now, for example, this year we are participating in the UN Year of the Light project. There is no official participation from the Greece. We aspire to be the grassroots participation in the UNESCO project. So our students have started to work with their own apps, serious games, or digital creativity projects in order to participate in this UNESCO project. Actually, they're starting to study a lot of science related to light science. So this is how we try to overcome and to find new ways to address the issue.
Okay, I'm going to talk about some local initiatives that I have been informed of. I have seen some university-funded projects, especially related to environmental education. For example, the University of the Aegean funds small projects for teachers to work on a specific topic. They open calls and then they get proposals and they fund the best of the proposals. I have seen something similar in the education departments in the University of Patras. And also I have seen some initiatives from museums, such as the University Museum of Science and Technology in Patras. They have initiatives where they invite secondary schools, secondary education schools. And also some museums related to physical history, they tend to have some programs where the different schools can participate. The main problem with this, I have seen that information is not enough. If they get just email, they tend to, if they are interested, they might follow the program, but it's too much of information for them, as my colleague just said. And as I previously said, there's always a need for some motivation or approval for them to participate in these extracurriculum projects. But there are several EU programs run by these museums or by the departments that give funding for such opportunities.
I'll try to paint a map of the support or general availability of empowerment for STEM teachers in Bulgaria. So from the public side of it, basically there are free funding mechanisms and three sectors which engage in this. One is the state budget, the second one is operational programs, and the third one is philanthropy. When we think about the age-old conservative state system, we have two centers of excellence, two types of sectors of excellence in Bulgaria who try to empower STEM teachers and teachers in general. One is a national institute which trains both directors and teachers, and the second one are pedagogical units within the universities. However, unfortunately, as my colleague mentioned, typically they're vested in a single department, so there is no communication of between. So there is no link. Why do we need to teach science in an attractive manner? The question is actually perhaps what the latest developments in science are, but not how do we make it interesting for our students.